Alabama's leaving the SEC. Their first team will play in the AFC East instead of the Jets, and their second team will replace the Jaguars in the AFC South. This was aired on an Auburn podcast. Hi, everyone. This is Will O'Toole for Park Ridge Sports. I'd like to welcome you to another edition of Sports History. And, of course, this is, let's see, Martin Luther King weekend. And, of course, the NFC and the AFC are all time. Well, we're going to find out who, by the end of the day, who are going to be in the round of 4 to play for the right to go to the Super Bowl. But and that's why I'm leading into all things football today, because just recently the Jets hired a new coach, as did the Jacksonville Jaguars. And I want to really just pay attention more to the Jaguars, because I think that's a more interesting story in this respect. The Jaguars hired, of course, Urban Meyer. And the first thing I thought about when I saw that Urban had left, let's say, Fox Studios or sports commentary on for college football, and that he took a job with the NFL. I was thinking about how many other coaches have done that in their career. Now, I knew it was going to be a long and laborious thing to do, but fortunately, I plugged in some keywords and. Kudos to, again, Football Reference, and I saw something on NBCSports.com. They actually had a list of about 27 coaches who coached in the college ranks and then became NFL head coaches. And, of course, what I did was I broke that down, and I looked for particularly this. I didn't want coaches that had experience as a tight end coach or a defensive coordinator or offensive coordinator in the NFL, then went to the colleges and came back. I basically wanted a guy who had no experience whatsoever in the NFL ranks, was a college head coach, and then proceeded to take on the task of being a coach for the professionals. It's a very difficult move. And that's why I was really interested in it. And of course, I did get a huge help. And I have to be very honest. I'm probably more than likely there are other coaches that have gone from the college ranks as a head coach to the pros. And maybe you're going back into the 40s and all the rest of it. But I did want to limit it in the last 50 years. And again, I guess I'm living in the last 50, maybe even 60, and to a certain extent, maybe even 70 here for this one brilliant head coach. But I wanted to limit it that way because I really do believe that the college game and the NFL games have really kind of met. Whereas many years ago, it was really the college game and the NFL was kind of an afterthought. That college was the be-all and end-all game, and that football was, okay, well, I've got nothing else to do with my career. Let me see if I can put in a couple of years in the NFL before I go to law school or before I become a doctor or whatever. And I really believe that kind of theory by me really does play out because really, when you think about it, I was going through it. I was looking at George Halas. Really, Halas didn't have any head coaching experience in the college ranks. He was really the be-all and end-all of the Chicago Bears for all those years. He does hire a couple of guys who did have previous experience in the college ranks, but for the most part, Papa Bear was the head coach for years with the Chicago Bears. Then you're thinking about guys like Shula. I know that Shula was I know that he was a defensive coordinator. Might have been with Baltimore before he became the head coach of the Colts and then moved on to the Dolphins. Of course, Landry and Lombardi were both on the same staff with the Giants during their 50s years, I think under Jim Lee Howe. And even though Lombardi did coach at Army, he had the NFL experience. So they kind of like took themselves out of the conversation. And then I'm just thinking of any other big time football coaches that I can think of. Well, you always have Lou Saban, who, depending on what day of the week it is, he might be coaching an NFL team, and then he goes and he secures a job on the college ranks. He's an interesting kind of a character because he had a myriad of head coaching jobs, and he always seemed to be the kind of guy that, at the very worst, you could just go to for that year to kind of give you some stability in both the college and the NFL head coaching ranks. Lou Saban, to me, is kind of like this. If you recall the actor Ken Berry, now Ken Berry was not not a big time actor by any means at all, but if he showed up on your show, he kind of gave your show a little bit of legitimacy, probably because he was around so much. And I just think of him on Cal Burnett, the Andy Griffith Show, and a host of other things. And it seemed like, even in a Brady Bunch couple episodes, but he always seemed to give your television program a little bit of legitimacy. I think Lou Saban was like that. Not a great, statistically speaking, not a great head coach, but a kind of guy that you would probably bring in to stabilize your franchise or get it going or organize it, whatever. But there was about 27 individual coaches that and the NBC Sports website, and then checking again with two other sources, Wikipedia and the Football Reference, they had about 27, which is a pretty good indicator of guys who went from now they had it as the guys who went from the college ranks and then assumed head coaching roles. But what was included in that were guys like Pete Carroll, Tom Coughlin, and Butch Davis, who did spend some time in the NFL at different roles, as I stated, either as a defensive coordinator or as the linebacker coach or the halfback or running backs coach or the quarterbacks coach. And then they went to the colleges, got their experience as a head coach, and then came back to the NFL to become the head coach. A guy like, I was looking at a fellow by the name of Dennis Green, who started in the NFL. Then, and I'm just giving you some of the examples I also found, then went to Northwestern and Stanford. When he was at Northwestern, he was seen as a really good coach, even though Northwestern, I think, was in the midst of losing 34 games in a row at one point. And this is the late 70s, like 78, 79. And then, of course, Green goes on to Stanford and coaches the Cardinal. But actually, he does coach for 10 years with the Minnesota Vikings. And that was his first NFL stop. And he actually had 97 wins. So he averaged over 9 wins a season with the Vikings, just never got them to the promised land of the Super Bowl, like Bud Grant did in the early 70s. Then there are other guys like Al Groh. Marv Levy kind of scared me in this respect. I thought maybe Levy spent all of his time in the college ranks and then, moved right to Kansas City. That wasn't the case. He actually goes back and forth between the leagues. So he has a pretty interesting resume himself. And I also believe Marv Levy was like an English literature coach or an English literature professor while he was in college. So pretty smart guy. And, just a shout out for him, because I know that the Buffalo Bills obviously playing in the championship game, and people are saying that it's been 25 years since they've been there before the last time. I know that Marv Levy and those Buffalo Bills teams of the 90s get quite criticized. And they were equated to the Minnesota Vikings and at one point the Denver Broncos as teams that got to the big game but couldn't win it all. Two things about that. I think what people are starting to realize, getting to the Super Bowl is an accomplishment. We have made probably winning the Super Bowl the be all and end all. It's just the nature of the beast. probably because the game has gone from being a game into an event. It's probably the last party that people have before winter really embraces us. And as we wait for spring to melt all the snow, but it's become an event. And unfortunately, when you lose the event, that really has a mark against you. And really, what's unfortunate for Marv Levy and those Buffalo Bills is that they lost not one, not two, not three, but four in a row, and they lost them all to NFC East teams. And of course, the big one, probably the one that was the most crushing, was losing to quote unquote in-state rival, the New York Giants, even though they play all their games out here in East Rutherford. And of course, that game, beating Bill Parcells, beating the Buffalo Bills offense with Bill Belichick, that really put Parcells in the same level as the Chuck Knowles, the Tom Landrys, the Vince Lombardis, because he has those two Super Bowl titles. Plus, it was a great game under all kinds of circumstances. Of course, we were in a war with Iraq as we helped the Kuwait, who were being overrun by them. So there was a lot of history around that game. And of course, who can forget Whitney Houston's beautiful rendition of the Star Spangled Banner? But that game really has resonated over time. And unfortunately, it was the Bills with the just miss field goal by Scott Norwood that really had an impact on their franchise. However, that being said, it is quite remarkable that the Bills do get back there the following year. Yes, and they lose again. But then the Bills get back again. Yes, and they do lose again. But then they do get back for a fourth time. And yes, they do lose. And of course, you could put the yoke of Loserville, of big time loser around them, and you would have four examples of it. I get all that. But I think as time has gone on, you start to realize even losing four Super Bowls is still an accomplishment because they got there 4 straight years. They were a dominant team in the AFC, and nobody could really touch them in the AFC for those 4 years. And I know, here's the big if. If Norwood puts that ball through, who knows? We might be talking about the Buffalo Bills in the same realm as Tom Brady's New England Patriots. We might be talking about maybe the Giants and Parcells being just that the one for Super Bowl winner. And it would have changed the whole complexion of the NFL as we speak of it today. And who knows where the Bills would be in terms of their status among great teams of all time. The funny thing is, I teach, and I was actually showing that 91 football, that Super Bowl game with the Bills. I can't tell you how many Hall of Fame players were in that game, but or near Hall of Fame players. But you have Bruce Smith, Jim Kelly, Lawrence Taylor. So that game was an exciting game. Yes, the Giants dominated it in terms of time of possession. Yes, the Bills were never able to assert their offense. Remember, they had the no huddle and, Bill Belichick's defense, plus some timely plays by the Giants offense, really kept the Bills not only off the field, but off balance. It's just one of those things. The Giants win. The Bills lost by maybe the narrowest of margins, not just by the score, but literally by a kick. And if that goes through, who knows? We might be talking about the Bills winning 4 Super Bowls in a row. So, again, as I always tell you, Marv Levy, as I'm looking at it, kind of, I guess this was in my deep recesses. I've really always had a I do have a soft spot probably for the AFL teams to a certain extent. I always loved their goofy uniforms and all the rest of it. I always loved that they were kind of the rival to the NFL for a while. So, Marv Levy, and And I do believe Marv Levy was just elected last couple of years into the Hall of Fame. So at least the writers, I think, recognize what he accomplished in Buffalo. And then you have Mariucci, Steve Mariucci, Ray Perkins, John Robinson, who does lead the LA Rams to 2 NFL title games. Bobby Ross. This was a weird one. Ross was kind of an interesting character in that um, even Ross, I'm pretty sure he does get some NFL head coaching experience. In fact, I'll look that up again as we speak, as I go on. But Ross had coached at the Citadel, at Maryland, at Georgia Tech, but I'm pretty sure he had some NFL experience. So I'm just going to put a caveat there. And if I don't find it today, of course, I'll mark that up next week. But he does lead the Chargers to the Super Bowl that they lost to the 49ers. It wasn't as even close as the game indicated. And then you have then you have Nick, no relation to Lou Saban. And he's kind of interesting. He does. People don't realize this. And this is why I'm pretty sure I had Bobby Ross correct too. Saban was, and we've talked about Saban already with his remarkable record at Alabama, of course, a plethora of national championships for the Crimson Tide, and of course that one at LSU. But the funny thing about, as I put Bobby Ross in, funny thing about Saban is that he does actually spend 1 year in the NFL. I think he was the defensive back coach with Detroit and then takes the Toledo job. And the funny thing with the Toledo job is that he wins 9 games. He has some success there, obviously, with Toledo. Gets hired with Michigan State, and then the rest is history. Goes on to LSU, wins a national title there. Tries his hand with the Miami Dolphins, and really, listen, I never knock these guys. They know more about football and more about coaching and managing players and getting into the psyche of the players. But really, he fell flat on his face and goes back to Alabama and takes over and has made that team into a juggernaut, which is why I had the cartoon today. I actually believe that you could probably take Alabama's team right now. I bet you that Urban Meyer, if he had a choice and he had, let's say, 20 slots, he would probably take Trevor Lawrence as his number 1 football pick as his quarterback. And then if he could get rid of his Jacksonville players, as long as he can get rid of, let's say, his Jacksonville players and replace them with any of the Alabama players, I bet you would find like 20 of the Crimson Tide players on his Jacksonville squad for next year, because that is how powerful that Alabama team is. Nobody can come close to them. I mean, everyone. Oh, and just by the way, as I'm going in, I don't want to forget you guys out there. He was a Kansas City quarterback and running back coach and special teams coach way back when. So he went from the Citadel to the NFL, back to Maryland, had some pretty good years there at Maryland. And then he goes to G-Tech. And of course, he wins the national title. It's a split national title with the Yellow Jackets. They split that year in 1991 with, I believe, I know he beat Nebraska in the Orange Bowl. I want to say that it was either Washington or Miami. I could be, I'm pretty sure it might be Washington that he split the national championship with when he was at Georgia Tech. And then, of course, that feeds his chance to go to San Diego and then to Detroit. And, of course, he wound up at Army for 2004, 5, and 6. So not enough about Ross. I was right that I thought maybe I overlooked him. I didn't. But of the 9 guys here that I really want to concentrate on. But Saban is an interesting guy because he was a defensive back coach, takes the Toledo job. From there, success at Toledo. I think he had 2 years where I think he went 9-2 with the Rockets. And then, of course, he secures the job with the Michigan State Spartans. I guess what you could really, was he successful at Michigan State? Technically, he has a winning record. and they do go to some bowl games. But I bet you that if you look at it right now, I think probably Saban matured as a coach, as a head coach in the SEC, and that Michigan State, and to be fair to Michigan State, they're always going to be the second sister to the Wolverines of University of Michigan. Remember that Michigan State wasn't even an original member of the Big Ten, and they actually had 9, and then they were welcomed in to become the 10th member. But Saban does have 1 year, so I had to toss him out. So and then 2 other guys I want to just bring up: Steve Spurrier. Now, Spurrier, the funny thing about him, I had to cast him aside. He is the only Heisman Trophy winner. As a matter of fact, when he was playing in Florida, he won the Heisman Trophy in '66. But also with him, he coached the Tampa Bay Bandits. How can I forget? The red and black. I love their uniforms. I love their logo. He had an exciting football team when they were back in the USFL. And then, of course, that league is defunct. It went out of business. He secures a job with Duke, turns that program into a winning. And when I say winning program for Duke, 6-5, I think he actually accepted the Florida job, his alma mater, on a night that they were supposed to play in a bowl game. And it was probably his best team at Duke. I think they might have been 8-3 or 8-4. They had like a game in the Independence Bowl. And then he secures the job with the Florida Gators. And of course, the rest is history with him because he wins a national title there. But Spurrier tried his hand in the NFL with the professionals, and that just didn't turn out so good with the Washington Redskins. And of course, then this guy, Bill Walsh. Now, Walsh is interesting. I knew I was going to have to disqualify him right away, even though he is mentored by the great Paul Brown. He spent 10 years as an assistant coach under Brown when they were in Cleveland, and also, I believe, I think in Cleveland, but I'm pretty sure mostly with the Bengals. And of course, I've read some stories that where Brown really kept his assistant coaches fettered, that he wouldn't allow them the freedom to leave the other teams. But Walsh leaves the Bengals and is he takes over Stanford, the Stanford Cardinal. What's weird about him is that he coached Stanford, then gets the job with San Francisco and turns that whole franchise around. San Francisco, before Walsh arrived, they had some good seasons, I do believe, in the AAFC. They come to the NFL. They definitely have some talent, but they are kind of they're a weird franchise. Like, if you take a look at some of their seasons, they would be, let's say, 7-5-2 and have some big wins against playoff teams. And I'm thinking like the Colts when they had Johnny U and stuff, and then fall flat on their face and lose to terrible teams. So they could never get out of, let's say, that 7-5. 1 year they went, I think in '69, they went 6-6-2. They tie the Cowboys on Thanksgiving night. I think the score is 24-all. That was actually the first Thanksgiving Day game I ever watched completely with my brother. I can remember what black and white set, amazing. My brother Jim, and he was a Cowboy fan, so I became a Cowboy fan. And they tied them that night. They had also beaten, previous to that, the Baltimore Colts, who were a playoff team the year before. Were coming off the Super Bowl loss, but they were still good. But then they fell flat on their face. I think at one point they had a chance to get to the playoffs and let's say lost 2 of their last 3 games, and they weren't even close, kind of like what the Giants did this year. So when Walsh arrives in the Bay Area and takes over San Francisco, he really does turn them into a winner. Remember that they had OJ on that team, I think, in '79. He takes over that program, and I call program. He takes over the football team, and OJ was in his last years anyway. He, in fact, I think maybe the first year that he was there, Bill Walsh, they were 2-14, or maybe they were coming off a 2-14 season. Anyway, he basically cleans house. And let me just see. I'll go to Wikipedia for this because sometimes just putting in, and as I say, Wikipedia is pretty good. The funny thing is with Walsh, they're 78 and 77 and 78. They win 2 bowl games. They go 17 and 7. Never won the Pac-8 or the Pac-10. But Walsh in his first year does go 2 and 14. Pardon me. And I think OJ was on that team, and of course OJ then retires. They're 6 and 10 the following year, and then in 81 when they win their first Super Bowl, they are 13 and 3. So if you he was 8 and 24 in his first 2 years. That's kind of deadly. He's 8 and 24. He went 84 and 35 over the next years with the 49ers. He made him into a buzzsaw. But just think about this, because I'm thinking about Adam Gase and a number of coaches who maybe get 2 years and then they're done today. Can you imagine that? He wins 8 games out of 32 games, a .250 winning percentage, and he kept his job. And it's a good thing he kept his job, and it's a good thing that he selected Joe Montana, because the next year he goes 13 and 3. And then, of course, in 84, they go 15 and 1. And of course, in 88, they go 10 and 6. And those are his 3 Super Bowl victories. He does have one bad year during that run, but that was the strike year of 82. They could never get off the ground. They were 3 and 6. But then 83, they lost in the championship game. They lost in a wild card game. They lost in a divisional game. And then they lost in another divisional game. So really with Walsh, if he had a vintage team, they were winning the whole thing. I mean, you can't argue that this guy was an innovator like his mentor, Paul Brown. Not just an innovator in terms of offensive plays and all the rest of it, just maybe the way he dealt with players and coaches, the fans, the media, and the owners themselves. But technically, Walsh is not on the list I was looking for. All right. So here are the 9 players. And you tell me, as we're going through this, are the 9 players, the 9 coaches, you tell me. I really think it's a real crapshoot in terms of whether they're successful or not on the pro level. But here are the 9. Paul Brown, Dennis Erickson, Lou Holtz, Jimmy Johnson, John McKay, Bobby Petrino, Mike Riley, Barry Switzer, Urban Meyer. And those 9 guys, of those 9 guys, 7 of them won national titles. But the interesting thing is, 6 of them won the national title in college before they went to the pro ranks. Only Lou Holtz won after he left the NFL. It's kind of weird. The other 2 guys, Mike Riley and Bobby Petrino, never won a national title prior to coming to the college from the college ranks to the NFL. But just going through all this, Dennis Erickson. Well, let me go back to Paul Brown. And as I said, I wanted to mention Brown, but also say there's a caveat there, because Brown was just coming into the game as the NFL was coming into popularity. So I don't know whether he had an advantage or a disadvantage, but I'll just lay the facts out for you. Brown leaves Ohio State. He wins a national title in 42. Of course, you have World War II. And then coming back from World War II, he decides that he's going to get into this venture with the NFL, even though his first coaching gig is with the Cleveland Browns in the AAFC, the All-American Football Conference. Well, he has a guy by the name of Otto Graham. He wins a number of titles in the AAFC. Actually, he wins 4 titles in the All-American Football Conference, and then goes to the NFL and wins 3 titles. All right, the last one being with Jimmy Brown in 1964 when they defeated the Baltimore Colts in the championship. That was actually Cleveland's last NFL title, and that was seen as the Super Bowl back then. So Brown, here's the interesting thing. Of these 9 guys that I found, They have compiled 383 wins total. They've lost 366 times, and there have been 6 ties, 5 of which were recorded by Brown. Of course, they do have ties in the NFL, but rarely now do you see a tie, even though it happened this year in the NFC East. But rarely do you see a tie as they go into sudden death, and usually the game is ended there. So he won 159 of the 383. And as I was doing the math, thank heavens I have a calculator on this computer. Brown is responsible for 41% of the wins of college coaches without NFL experience going to the NFL as a head coach. All right. So just want to give you the framework of that. All right. They only coached in college, and then they're hired to head coach in the NFL. And of course, Brown secured a 1942 title with the Ohio State Buckeyes. Then, really, using these two references, you got to go all the way to guys like Dennis Erickson. Now, Erickson won 2 titles, 89 and 91, while at the University of Miami. And he's hired, and he never had an NFL gig whatsoever. He goes to the NFL. He's with Seattle and one other team. Of course, brain lock right here. I'm just forgetting it. But primarily he's with Seattle. And he goes 40 and 56. I think he had 3 seasons where he was 8 and 8. With Seattle. And of course, there was that one game, and here are the Jets coming back into play. If you guys recall, when quarterback for the Jets is deemed over for a touchdown against Seattle, and that gets them into the playoffs and keeps Seattle from getting out. And of course, video replay, it looks like he's not over. And they show it and show it, and still the referees signaled the touchdown. Lou Holtz is probably an interesting character on this. Now, Holtz, as I always mention, actually won for Notre Dame 2 national titles, not 1. He did win one on the sidelines of the Fighting Irish back in '88. And I always felt that he also helped the Irish win the national title in the '77 season, when in the Orange Bowl of 1978, January 1st, '78, he defeated Oklahoma while he was the head coach at Arkansas. And that really helped the Irish leapfrog, or really reinforced their claim to the #1 title, because in the afternoon they had buried Texas, which was the #1 team in the country, 38-10, and taken out Earl Campbell and all the rest of it. Okay. So I always say that Holtz wins the Irish 2 national championships, but he only went 3-10 with the Jets. And I think he was really miserable in the professional ranks, because he doesn't even finish that season. I think it's 1973 or 74 with the Jets, and he just leaves and leaves the last game and goes back to the college ranks. And of course, he had coached at William and Mary, I believe. He had coached at Bowling Green, or University of Miami. No, not University of Miami University in Ohio. He had coached under Woody Hayes. He had coached at North Carolina State, as I mentioned, Arkansas, Minnesota. And of course, at Minnesota, he took that contract with the stipulation that if the Notre Dame job had opened, he would jump for it and would be allowed to get out of the contract. So Holtz has quite a journey as a college coach, but he was only 3-10 college ranks. And then, of course, you get Jimmy Johnson. He's the only one of the group that actually won a national title as a player. 1964 with Arkansas. They had some pretty good teams back then in Arkansas. Then he goes, he coached at Oklahoma State, and then he gets the job at the University of Miami, where his career really takes off on both the college and the pro level. The interesting thing is, though, when I was going back, I was really surprised at this. Jimmy Johnson only won 1 national title while at Miami. And I probably knew it and didn't know it. And then I was like, wow, because you always think, wow, that a you always just think of Miami with all the national titles, and you just naturally assume it was Jimmy Johnson, and it wasn't. Howard Schellenberger, who I always give the credit to turning that Miami program into the beast that it was in the 80s, won the first national title for the Hurricanes. And Erickson really kept the pieces going after Johnson left, and he won the two titles. And of course, Johnson lost. In my mind, it was a classic game, that 14-10 loss to Penn State in the Fiesta Bowl of 1986-87 season. But Jimmy Johnson, he's 80 and 64. It's a good question. Who was more successful, Brown or Johnson? Johnson, of course, wins the two Super Bowls. Of course, Paul Brown, even though they had the Super Bowl in existence when he was the coach of the Bengals and never got there, I would probably say that for all intents and purposes, Brown was probably the more effective head coach in the NFL, and Jimmy Johnson, taken together, was probably the more successful coach because he does have the two Super Bowl wins. And of course, that's the first thing anybody looks at. Then here's the one that probably, and this is the one I guess where it was the catalyst for all of this research, or what I thought. And that was John McKay, who was a real thorn in the side for the Irish during the 60s and 70s. If you recall, and I will do this eventually one day on Park Ridge Sports History, and that is, I would love to just do that complete game of that 66 tie between Notre Dame and Michigan State. Not because I'm such a blatant Notre Dame fan, but because the game was seen as a classic. But I also think this. I also believe that Michigan State, I always thought, escaped from that game without getting any criticism at all. And meanwhile, the Irish went on, took the tie, destroyed USC the following week, like 51-0 out in Southern California, and then retreated to South Bend because they never played in a bowl game for a long period of time until 1969, and they win the national title. Well, that drilling that Notre Dame gave them in 66 really irked McKay, because he vowed he would never lose to Notre Dame again. And I have to be very honest here. 67, they win. 68, they win. 69, they win. 70, win. 71, they win. 72, they win. 73, Notre Dame pulled it out in South Bend. I'll never forget it. Eric Pennick rushes for a big touchdown, and they win the game 14-7. And as a kid, I just remember this. Notre Dame only won the national title when they defeated USC. And of course, they win that year. And that game I always tell you about, the Sugar Bowl of New Year's Eve, 1973, a classic game that's overlooked. And then they go right back to it, 74, probably the quintessential Notre Dame loss to USC, because Notre Dame had a 24-0 lead, I believe, at one point. Then it was shaved to 24-6. And right before halftime, Anthony Davis runs a touchdown back after the Irish had taken a 24-6 lead. You're saying, wow, they're going to pound the Trojans here in SC. Well, he runs the kickoff back, and then he does it, I believe, coming back of the second half. In all, Irish are up 24-0. SC scores the last 55 points in the game, and the Irish are just drilled in that game. So I think McKay really made his point. One loss in the next 10 years with them. But McKay leaves. SC had won numerous titles there. Of course, he had OJ and Mike Garrett, all these plethora of great players. But he's not successful at Tampa Bay. In fact, remember, he loses his first 26 games with them. And the funny thing is, he lost the 26 games with them, but he actually finishes 44, 88, and 1. So he was really 44, 62, and 1. Now, I'm not saying that's bad. I mean, it's terrible. All right. I think McKay realized his real passion was for the college game, and it's not a case of him not being able to coach in the professional ranks. As I just think sometimes you just know where you're more comfortable. And I think he was more comfortable coaching at the college ranks. He never coached again, but really after that 0-26 start, I'm not saying it's great, but it's not as bad. I mean, 44 and 62, it's basically the same record as Dennis Erickson of 40 and 56. Bobby Petrino and Mike Riley, collectively, they won 17 games. I'm putting those two together because they simply didn't win a national championship. Riley, to me, has always been a strange hire. He was at Oregon State for a couple of seasons, was okay. Then he gets hired by San Diego, and obviously goes 14 and 34, and then goes back to Oregon State. Now, I put him as a caveat because he actually coached professionally in the CFL, the Canadian Football League. I think he was a defensive back coach for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, one of the great names of all time in football. But kind of a strange deal there. And then, of course, the last guy before Urban Meyer is Barry Switzer. Interesting thing with Switzer, here's the odyssey. He wins 3 titles, 74, 75, and 85 at Oklahoma, and basically retired as a college coach. And then Jimmy Jones brings him back to be head coach of the Cowboys. And, of course, he wins the Super Bowl. He goes 40 and 24. Not bad. I think his last 2 years, I know he was 6 and 10 one year. So he just kept the Jimmy Johnson buzzsaw going, wins a Super Bowl. So he wins 3 national titles, college, plus a Super Bowl after being retired. And he's really the only one who did that. Kind of an oddity there. And that brings me up to Urban Meyer, who's got 3 national titles, has, like Switzer, left the college ranks after he left Florida. He took some time off, and he's been the color commentator and all the rest of it with, I believe, Fox and ESPN and all the rest of it. And now he's returning to the NFL as the head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, he does have the first pick. More than likely, it looks like he's going to take Trevor Lawrence, but it'll be interesting to see whether he can go the way of a Paul Brown or a Barry Switzer or a Jimmy Johnson, or will he go the way of Holtz and a John McKay? This is Will O'Toole for Park Ridge Sports History. Thanking you again for joining me. Have a good day, all, and I'll see you next week with another episode.